Welcome to The Future Is Now, Public Safety Connected, where we explore the people, partnerships, and technology shaping the future of public safety communications. I'm your host, John Paul Jones, Executive Director of the Public Safety Broadband Technology Association, the PSBTA. As we prepare for the 2026 PSBTA FirstNet Vision Summit, that'll be in Las Vegas, Nevada this year, September 14th through the 16th, we're highlighting organizations that are transforming how first responders communicate, collaborate, and protect our communities. Today's guest is Brooks Shannon, Director of Emergency Communication Solutions at Esri. So for decades, Esri has helped public safety agencies better understand the world around them through geographic information systems. And today, that work is moving beyond the streets and neighborhoods and inside our schools, hospitals, government buildings, airports, industrial facilities, and critical infrastructure. We'll discuss how indoor GIS, resilient communications through FirstNet, and collaboration among public safety disciplines are creating a new era of operational awareness. Brooks, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it very much.
You bet. So, Brooks, many people recognize Esri because of ArcGIS, but public safety has evolved tremendously over the last decade. Can you tell us about your role at Esri and how GIS has evolved from being primarily a planning tool into something that supports real-time operations every day?
I'm happy to. And let me first start by sharing a little bit about what I do at Esri. So
Sure.
I'm Esri's Director for Communication Solutions. What that really means is that I help our user community, which includes mostly folks that create and maintain geographic information systems data. Usually that's outdoors these days. Again, road center lines, address points, response boundaries for 911 and computer-aided dispatch purposes, but is increasingly moving indoors. I help our users understand how to apply our technology to do more with that, as well as our partner ecosystem to leverage more of our platform as well. And then I help Esri better understand all of the intricacies of the emergency communications industry, not just 911, but land mobile radio, public safety broadband, and mass notification as well, outbound from the ECC. So very happy to be here today and to talk about those things. And prior to coming to Esri about 2.5 years ago, I worked for Esri Partners my entire career before that for 20 years, first as a software developer, then as a product manager leading product teams, developing technical standards with APCO, NINA, Etsy in Europe, and others. And I've witnessed a tremendous evolution within public safety as it relates to being able to connect to, whether or not it's on-premise or on cloud, web-based GIS resources, instead of having side-loaded data that you would deploy on, your MDTs or your MDCs or computers in the ECC. That's how I started. When I was a developer, I would run around the country with, DVDs of data that I would deploy on the computers. And of course, that's like you buy a new car and you drive it off the lot and it's already starting to date itself, right? Whereas if you can host data in a central place that is updated, effectively live or in near real time, that provides the ability to connect to fresher things, and it provides more people, more stakeholders, the ability to connect to that same data, not just providing situational awareness, but situational intelligence. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I noticed in my career as a shift from where things were to where they are today.
Well, I love that phrase, situational intelligence. And, the fact that you've been able to kind of witness along the way this entire evolutionary process of the collection and use of data, but especially to be able to, coin that phrase these days, because the thing is, in the past, we did not have the ability to have that situational intelligence, where it was absolutely real-time intelligence. So that's where Esri comes in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as much as I wish I could take credit for that term, there was a gentleman, he's a senior VP of IoT and edge computing at Qualcomm. We were on a panel about AI and indoor location and indoor mapping a few months ago at a conference overseas. And we were talking about artificial intelligence and how that can be used to add true intelligence to the situational awareness that we otherwise have. And that really stuck with us. All of us on the panel were just really, really taken with that particular term. And I think for me, that's key, right? And GIS can provide so much of that when you couple it with a resilient network that can deliver the content quickly. And I think that's key. And we'll certainly talk about that much more today.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, you roll right through it. And the thing is that, these things that you roll through, evolution of GIS, real-time operational intelligence, and I love that, situational intelligence. But, in effect, decision support, right, in real time. I mean, and that's what you give us. And of course, fire, EMS, law enforcement, emergency management integration, and that's what we're all about, is multidisciplinary interoperability, right? And so, and that's the world we live in now. It has to be, instantaneous, real-time information that's usable. And when I say usable, at that point, to be digestible, you know what they say, complex carbohydrates break down into one molecule, be able to be used by your cells. It's called glucose. And it's kind of like you guys do that with all this data. It's kind of amazing. But so lessons learned, let's say, from large scale disasters, right? And that's where, where these tools can be brought to bear. So whenever we watch major disasters unfold, so whether hurricanes, earthquakes, or wildfires, we're reminded that responders depend on accurate information and reliable communications. And recently, the earthquake, in Venezuela, once again demonstrated how quickly situational awareness can become one of the greatest challenges. And from your perspective, what lessons can agencies learn from events like these, regarding location intelligence and mapping and resilient communications?
It's a fantastic question. And, speaking about the earthquake and the tragedy therein, right, it makes me think of Esri's disaster response program, which, just to give a brief highlight there, it's a free program that folks can contact us for help. And we'll provide that through to, additional consulting licenses for temporary use, et cetera, to make sure that as people are doing search and rescue efforts, as people are, going through cleanup, as we're dealing with the after effects of something like this, that anything that is location-based, which as we know most of our world is, can be put into a place that multiple stakeholders from multiple agencies and different teams can see and can critically analyze. Whether or not that's drone imagery that was recently flown to show how many buildings were damaged and to what extent, using AI to process that imagery and get more intelligence that way, or if it's simply understanding where our resources are and where we need more of them. I think of it in somewhat of an overused term of that single pane of glass, right? But it is. GIS at its core is points, lines, and polygons with attribution behind them, but those things can be very fluid and dynamic. And it makes me think of GIS as being not just nearly a static database anymore. It almost becomes like a data fusion portal or hub or enterprise system that supports all of that. It's a substrate for information sharing, and not just even sharing the information, but deriving new insights from it in this wild world of AI that we live in.
Well, it's like, I don't know. When I was out at your, the Esri conference here back when the DC plane crash happened, right? And so, you remember what happened there as far as where, gosh, it was like late in that evening. And when we got news of it, and so one of the operational IT people from Washington, D.C., excuse me if I can't remember his rank and his name, but he said, "Oh my gosh, this is going on right now." And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a couple of your folks and this individual from DC Fire went in the back room, developed an app, sent it back to DC, and they ran that entire operation with that for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. It was absolutely unbelievable. The amount of time it takes nowadays to roll those kinds of applications and to distribute them. When I started, you're literally writing code and compiling it and distributing, installers and executables. Now you can take an existing app like ArcGIS Field Maps, configure it to your needs, build, back it up with a Survey 1, 2, 3, have dashboards on top of all of that in a matter of, minutes.
Oh, there were dozens and dozens of agencies that came together, on that scene. And then as far as processing, geolocating evidence and,
Exactly.
in the thousands. It was just, and that's where you guys, you shine so much in that, bringing that stuff to bear in a usable form, just like I was saying, it's digestible, it's in the form that, and from an operations standpoint, it is a godsend. So, that was remarkable. Honestly, I was stunned. So, but yeah, so, from a, infrastructure disruption standpoint, that's where like FirstNet comes in as far as having that backbone to be able to operate from. But, how do you see the world in regarding like, that infrastructure, excuse me, disruption and keeping this in real time?
I think for me, it's ensuring that the network or networks that you are utilizing um, are as resilient as possible, and that we make sure that we provide, uh, whether or not it's secondary, tertiary, et cetera, pathways to the internet, and making sure that what you're hosting on the internet, whether or not it's something private using ArcGIS Enterprise on premise or in a gov cloud or something like that, or it's something like ArcGIS Online where we take care of the hosting ourselves across multiple platform providers and data centers, making sure that you don't just have that single point of failure. It reminds me of a story I'd heard where there was a 911 center that got impacted by a fiber cut. They had redundant lines, but they were on either side of the train tracks that led into town,
Uh,
right? So, putting a little thought to that, making sure that you have access to that. And I think that's where, low Earth orbit satellites are going to be really quite interesting as a way to augment what we already have with priority and
Right.
preemption with FirstNet. But I don't want to just speak about the network, right? It's making sure that our software is resilient. It's making sure that we can easily distribute that information to the variety of devices that folks use, and thinking about it from that bigger picture of really holistic resilience, not just what we sometimes will often talk about, which is just network access on its own. Making sure that we have the ability to send IP packets, and possibly a lot of them with media, large imagery data sets, LiDAR scans, et cetera, that we talk about in the GIS world, but then making sure that those systems that then process them are resilient.
Well, so when I was out at your conference and I was talking to a couple of your folks, I said, well, they were talking about priority preemption, FirstNet being, it's a hardened public safety grade of network. And so I said, the beauty of it is, as we innovate and move forward, that's the focus is on, like you said, it's that resiliency. And so, I said, the intersecting technologies is I wrote that down, and one of them pointed at it and said, you know what, that is spot on, because that's what it takes. When you look at sat to phone and a lot of these things that are coming about to intersect, to give you that resiliency, redundancy, kind of that three rings of capability, almost like hot, warm, and cold zone. We kind of in the fire service kind of overlay that to everything, right? So, but it's amazing what Esri's doing, and we can't get enough of it. I mean, you guys, you turn the corner on the innovation kind of the equation. I mean, as things accelerate into the future, it's like, Esri's bringing something to bear every 6 months. It's like, wow, what are they going to, one of our operations chiefs said, who are these people? How do they come up with this stuff? But it's a brainchild of something where it's dedicated to taking care of people. And that's what I like about Esri. It's almost like a motto within the company that, we're going to do something good with this, and you have. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, we really do focus on the GIS for good efforts that we have, and I think the disaster response program is a shining example of that. That we've got the back of people that need that geospatial support when something bad happens. We activate our staff, and we do it all the time.
Yes, you do. And I tell you, I can't wait to get back out to the Redlands too, because that was a refreshing. You come back energized when you know what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
So when it comes to connectivity, that we're just talking about that makes information actionable. And I love that kind of statement, because connectivity, information, and be able to act upon it. So maps and data only help responders if they can access them when they need them. So, and to me, that's where FirstNet becomes such an important part of the conversation. So how does reliable, prioritized connectivity, and we talked a little bit about that, transform GIS from simply information into operational capability?
For me, a lot of it comes down to access to fresh data, whether or not that's streaming data or it's simply up-to-date maps, and broadening that level of access so it's not just someone who just so happens to have a connection to a resilient network that has high bandwidth, but really anybody that can have access to FirstNet, right?
Right.
It broadens the level of access so much so, right? In the 90s and 2000s, this was only a hope and a dream that, you know, someone out in rural America would have the same degree of access as you might enjoy in an urban location, and that everybody
yeah.
could see the same stuff, right? I've got a few quotes from my colleague Mike Cox that I want to read. And I want to make sure I get these right. He said, "The first incident should not be the first time responders learn the layout of a building."
Well, that's
And Mike says a lot of really resonant things, but that one stuck with me and I might steal it because it is spot on. And you shouldn't have to go to a school like a gentleman told me a few years ago at a conference and get the map by going to a lockbox, getting a key and pulling it out and having a single sheet of paper that a single human being looks at. Right?
well, I love that. In that, you know, that is so across any discipline, right? We don't want to be seeing this for the first time. So, you know, real-time intelligence should never mean first-time intelligence, you know, so, and I think that needs to resonate across public safety. And I know it does, because that's been kind of the movement in, not only with the advancement of technology to be able to do something with it, but this whole thing about putting a binder and have it, you know, on a shelf somewhere and get it, you know, go dust it off when something happens. It just doesn't work. There's no real time. Matter of fact, it's like too little, too late, and you might as well not even break it out. So that's what I love in about what you guys are doing. And Mike, we talk a lot about that, and you know, he's very passionate about it because you know, across the country and probably across the globe now in public safety, you know, we're doing things different, and you know, bringing this to bear. And once again, shouldn't be the first time you've seen these things. And so real time doesn't mean the first time. So I like that. But the so indoor maps versus indoor GIS. So one topic generating tremendous interest in indoor mapping. You know, many people hear the terms indoor maps, indoor GIS, and assume they're the same thing, right? So, you know, can you explain the difference and why both are, you know, essential?
Yeah, and I often talk about this a lot myself, but to share something else that Mike Cox said, he said, quote, "The value is not the map itself. The value is shortening the time between receiving information and taking action. If a crew can immediately locate a stairwell, hazardous materials room, standpipe connection, AED, or patient location, that's time saved during the moments that matter most." And that's spot on. And those things may not be necessarily just what you visually see on a map. It might be a computer that analyzes that data to tell you where the nearest AED might be, right?
Oh, yeah.
Or what the nearest ingress point might be, right? There's one of my dear friends, Susan Benedicto from the city of Frisco, Texas, has worked on a program for many years called SAFE, or Situational Awareness for Emergency Response. And in the city, they've mapped something like 200 or 250 buildings, of course, schools, of course, but they have, let's say they have a NFL teams training facility there. I don't want to speak out of turn and get the name wrong. You know, so it's a whole mess of different buildings. They have that matched up against AED locations, all sorts of other infrastructure, to include over 6,000 CCTV cameras that 911 TCs and the ECC to first responders to other qualified individuals can pull up at a moment's notice in the center as well as on their phones. So there was a fire that broke out in one of their schools. And before they arrived, the crew pulled up the cameras to look at where the fire was. And they found the smoke and they found the source. It was in a laundry room adjacent to the kitchen. So instead of going to where the traditional main entrance might be, they were able to navigate directly there, find the right driveway, find the optimal route to get the equipment in there. And, you know, who knows, shave a few minutes off, and that can matter.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And, you know, we talk a lot about schools and indoor mapping from the perspective of school safety, of course, with the tragedies that we continue to see across the country. But if you're blessed with the resources to be able to create those maps and fuse that other kind of real-time data together and access it across a resilient network that has priority and preemption, rather, if you have the ability to take that data and stream it across a network with high bandwidth and high resiliency, you can put a lot of really great things to use that are above and beyond what you might just see when you're looking at a map. And I think that's where the power lies, is the data
Oh, yeah.
behind it and how unlimited that is.
Well, I like the fact you said you fuse those two things together. Say that one more time, because I mean that that makes perfect sense. Um, Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. It's, in my mind, is thinking, a map is simply something we're used to using and they've been used for 4,000 years. It's something you see, but when you fuse geographic data together from different sources, whether or not that's static data, it's real-time data like sensor feeds, camera feeds, you name it, that's where you can gain not just that awareness, but your situational intelligence.
Oh, absolutely. And just ironically, I mean, you fuse those two things together. That's usable information. It's got to go over a resilient, reliable network. And then FirstNet's got a new product coming out called Fusion. But ironically, but it allows for that in the mission critical push to talk with the broadband capability and the ability to send more than just voice, over that bandwidth. So makes perfect sense. But anyway, so the neat thing about when you talk about sharing information across public safety, so creating indoor GIS is only part of the challenge, of course, and the real value comes in information shared across the entire public safety ecosystem, which we just talked about. We just talked about that. So when you so how does FirstNet help ensure that the critical information reaches the right people at the right time? Because you talked about timing, and so my dad was an engineer, and so he was just real linear in his thinking, but he's always talked about how everything in life has steps, right? And if you miss a step, then it can be catastrophic, or it can be just a bump in the road. But the same thing with timing. If your timing's not in alignment, it's almost like it doesn't overlay with the need, which happens often, because that's the thing. We've always had to play catch up. I remember commanding a high rise fire, and I always felt like I was, because I was, and you couldn't do anything about it then, which was you're always lagging. You're minutes behind. I thought the crew was here. Now they're over there, and by the time you communicate through LMR, we were always behind the curve. But so how do you see that, as far as the critical information, reaching the right people at the right time?
I mean, I think I'll latch on to the word critical, right? We're not using commodity networks that may not be as reliable and as hardened as something like FirstNet, right? If you kind of look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, I kind of view that as air or water or food, right? You can't get at the data if you don't have a way to reliably get at it, and much less the kinds of data that we have today, right? It's not like when I wrote an AVL system when I had no gray hair and we were over 9,600 baud radio connections, right? Where every bit mattered, right? Now you're streaming video and you don't want to be looking at video that's highly compressed that's 5 minutes ago. You want to look at detailed video now. And that may not be something you do every day, but when something bad happens, that's the kind of intelligence you need. And in today's era, we can do that. And that's, I think, the value that the incredibly transformative value that FirstNet has brought to bear, is that you have something you can rely on that has the pipe, the bandwidth necessary so that you're not looking at the past, you're looking at now.
Oh yeah. And like I said before, that's what the beauty of the tools that Esri has provided for us. When I say the future is now, I mean literally, you guys have made the future now, because things we looked at and even recently that I thought, wow, how far off is that? You're like, oh no, we can do that now. So it's kind of shocking.
And some of the stuff that I even saw at our own conference, I was unaware of, and it just shocked me. So we have this stable of things that we call ArcGIS solutions, and they're free configurations of different capabilities and products within the ArcGIS ecosystem. If you have proper licensing for our products, you just get them for free. One that I talk a lot about is the address data management solution, because it makes managing address points and center lines for 911 emergency response easier. You don't really need as much GIS training to do that. We have a fire pre-incident plan solution for managing, for viewing, for operational dashboards. We are now testing a AI-based solution creation tool. So if you said, you know what, I want a solution that helps me figure out where to place AEDs more optimally inside of buildings, we're getting to the point where you can just type that out as a prompt and you get a downloadable solution template. That's unbelievable. especially having,
It is.
been someone who had to write lower level code from scratch, 15, 20 years ago.
Oh my gosh, of course, AI is kind of transforming what goes on. So Brooks, when it comes to standards, and public safety grade of everything, I mean, it's got to be hard and it's got to be, have the cyber secure part of the equation pinned down. And so why standards matter. So interoperability has always been a cornerstone of public safety communications, and indoor GIS will only reach its full potential if agencies are working from common standards. So why are standards so important?
Boy, I could go on and on about that, but having lived in that world for a long time, I gave a presentation once where I said, Brooks's definition of interoperability, quote unquote, is, you know, different systems from different manufacturers and different vendors all working together as though you never knew there was any difference at all
Oh, yeah.
for media, data, voice, you name it, right? And the last thing I want a first responder to have to do is be en route and go, okay, is that school map on a SharePoint site? Is that apartment map in one of my fire response apps? Is that shopping mall map on the shopping mall website? You need to be able to use the stuff you're already used to using, that you use on a day-to-day basis, right? In addition to that, as I've looked more and more into indoor mapping over the years, I've come to the realization that there are a lot of indoor maps that are already out there. They're just not necessarily in GIS, nor are they in a common format that can be shared easily, right? So there was a university, for example, in northern part of the US that came out for a tender for emergency response maps. And I thought that was a little curious because a few years prior, they had worked to develop a little script that would run every night to extract the changes to their maps out of the facilities management system and put them in a GIS system. So I went, why in the world would they be looking for emergency response maps if they already have
Oh, yeah.
indoor GIS data? And furthermore, then the question that I have asked other universities, I said, are you sharing those maps with fire EMS, law enforcement, the 911 center? And very rarely do I hear yes. More commonly, what I hear is, I never even thought of that. I never thought of doing it. So if you're sitting in an ACC or you are en route, you should, I think, be able to access a collection of all the maps you can possibly ever start to assemble in a standard format so that if you need to access them, you can, and so that your neighbors can access them if they're running mutual aid as well.
Oh,
And then
absolutely.
furthermore, you look at Next Gen 911, you've got counties now that are backing each other up from, hundreds of thousands of miles away across the country. If that center goes down and their calls start flowing automatically to some center 1,000 miles away, those dispatchers should be able to see the exact data that they would have seen if they would have just teleported into that other PSAP or that other
Oh, yeah.
ECC, right?
Oh, and that mutual aid response. I mean, so you're not going to be familiar with the physical pre-planning because they're from another jurisdiction. I mean, you might if you're adjacent,
Yeah.
but if you're coming in kind of, I don't want to say blind, but having access to that data could be, the difference between something tragically happening because they're lack familiarity with the structure or the surroundings, or I mean, thinking in terms of also like whether it be below ground, above ground, and so do you see a lot of improvement, of course, with the kind of the issue we had in the past with has this building been added on to or reconfigured either on the interior or exterior, and then so you got the data is not kept up to date, and so that whole standardization maybe of not maybe but of mapping. I think we've come a long way to where we are there, but I think the next step is making sure that it's from from a public safety point of view, situational intelligence, right?
Yep, absolutely. So at the bottom of the pyramid, you've got your data, and that needs to be standardized so you can share it. You need to have standards for the way that you share it, the conveyance mechanisms from point A to point B, right? And hopefully you've got some standards for the way, or at least best practices for the way that you compose those maps, so that if you are from another agency, you're not looking at that going, wow, that's wildly different in the way that you symbolize the things on the map,
Right.
so that you can generally tell what you're looking at, right? And then you need to be able to hopefully obtain a good enough location that you can figure out where someone is in that building, much less have the wireless signal to get the location out and the radios and mission critical push to talk systems working within. And standards ultimately is what enables all of that to happen. Right. Without standards, it's like in the old days when you had to pick up a train from one track and then move it over to another one by switching the wheels out. Right.
Oh, yeah.
We just don't have that luxury in public safety.
No, the speed of, this, what do they call it? I guess, the speed of need, would be it seems like everything's accelerating in regards to that, mainly because the ability to actually do something about it.
Yeah.
So, and then it comes down to, though, once you have knowledge of the use of, let's say, the FirstNet network, you know what it is, it's available.
Mhm.
Once you know that you have the ability to use like Esri technology, and in public safety, then it comes down to almost a liability issue of what did you know and when did you know it?
Mhm.
Because and then you really have to take advantage of it because, if not, it can have consequences. It's there.
Yeah, I think of the term risk of inaction.
Right.
Right? The tools exist today. The network, thank goodness, exists and has for a long time, and we can rely on it. So then the question becomes, now what?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, when I was, earlier, and excellent job on the panel, by the way.
Thank you.
But as I was listening, and I'm thinking, okay, building indoor GIS at scale, right? So no single organization owns all the information inside a building.
Mhm.
And who needs to come together to create and maintain indoor GIS across a community, let's say?
It's a really, really great question and one that I've been thinking about for a long time. And I want to make sure we focus on that maintenance aspect because you talked about what happens if you get a building that starts to expand, change the configuration of it.
Right.
It's one thing to go out and map a building. It's another thing to make sure that that thing is fresh and doesn't go out of date, right?
Right.
And that could even be just someone moving hazardous chemicals from one room to another, right? That could be
Right.
the addition of a portable at a school or something like that. It could be the addition of stop the blade kits around, who knows, right? Um, in order to really make this successful, you need to bring together everybody in that ecosystem that would either, own a building, manage a building, create the data, maintain the data, and use the data, right? And that could be just thinking out loud. That could be GIS people to help create and maintain the data. That could be school resource officers. That could be the head of a school safety program or a department within a county. That certainly is fire, EMS, law enforcement, your 911 telecommunicators for sure. That can also involve the um, architecture firms. They could involve planning and zoning, right? I know of
Right.
municipalities now that are requiring the submittal of digital CAD drawings for any form of building permit, right? You could work that into your local code, and that can help maintain those maps. And then on top of that, technology is improving to make that maintenance easier, right? It just so happens we have a tool called the floor plan editor, part of ArcGIS Indoors, that is a web-based tool that folks can use with no GIS knowledge to import existing things like PDFs, CAD drawings from a drafting system, building information model data, or just create maps from scratch, clean it up, make the edits, and away you go. And then if you were doing routine inspections, you could take that thing with you. And if you notice that the room numbers changed or they knocked a wall down or they put a wall up, you can make those edits. And we designed it with one specific person in mind, one kind of person, and that was a fire inspector. So
Right.
that they could go out during inspections and make those edits. And you could imagine a workflow where maybe they make the edits, it goes up to county or city GIS, they make sure everything's hunky-dory, and then it goes into the live indoor mapping system. All that stuff exists, and you can imagine the amount of people involved in making sure that that's successful. So we need to really, really bring them together.
Oh, yeah. And I've heard it said, from, I think it was a fire marshal actually was talking about what inspectors kind of feedback on the product was like, and the term was user friendly because, some things are out there more difficult to navigate, and then translation into field operations and getting it out there and have them use it and want to use it and feel good about, what they're doing. You guys hit a home run there for sure. So I appreciate that. Now on the, uh, so, 'cause this really reflects PSBTA's mission, when we were, talking earlier about, bringing these things together, and the fact that Esri has this knack for taking something very complex, and so when I was I had a college professor one time. He draws this model on the board. It says analysis, deliberation, decision, and outcome, right? And he says, "What do you guys think of that? Pretty sound?" And everybody's nodding their head. Yeah. And he goes, "I'm going to show you something different here." And this was what I believe Esri does. And in the future, Esri is going to use technology, the speed of need, right? The need for this information in real time. And he took a feedback loop, and he wrote analysis, deliberation. Okay, now let's go back to analysis. He said, because when you factor in what took place during that deliberation and reanalyze it, right, and then go back to deliberation one more time and make your decision, it's often a different decision than you would have had you not done that. And it kind of reminds me of what you guys have done, just on how you process things. And then, that translates to our decisions on the seat with the, like you said, the active intelligence that you guys provide. So,
Yeah, it's a feedback loop, right? It should not just be a one-way street. And I've been thinking a lot about that actually over the past few months. Where can we get to a place whereby, collecting all the data we are right now, whether or not that's in, the nearest database or other kinds of systems. What if we go back 20 years and we start scanning microfilm records so that we can feed those into AI to learn more? How could we take all of this information and influence our built world around us, right? Could we make this room safer? Could we make this facility safer by looking at incidents that have already occurred, as well as modeling future incidents inside of it, right? Could we run training exercises in buildings that haven't been built yet to find out whether or not it's going to be safe or not? And could that influence the design during a design build process?
we just had the anniversary of the Hyatt collapse
Yeah.
that occurred in Kansas City,
Mhm.
where the walkways, collapsed, and it was an engineering issue, of course, but it just made me think about that. Could there be some modeling to, how would we handle, an incident, or, I guess the cause and effect relationships of feeding all the information from engineering, use the AI platform. And I'm sure they're doing that now as far as engineering, to a certain extent. But for our purposes, I mean, of course, it would be, very useful.
And 100%. And unfortunately, I think sometimes safety sometimes takes a back seat to other concerns, especially when you're building new buildings or retrofitting them. There was a gentleman that I spoke to at our users conference just a few weeks ago, and he came up and he showed me this picture. We were talking about AEDs, and we were talking about, which I'll get to in a second, but he's like, "What do you see wrong with this picture?" And it was a school corridor. I thought, well, it looks really nice. It was just very clearly built. It was brand new. And he said, "You know what? Where's the fire extinguishers?" I said, "You know what? There are none, are there?" He said, "Here's the deal. They were built into recessed nooks in the wall for aesthetic purposes. So you'd have to physically walk past it to see it,
Yeah.
right? I don't think that's very great. You know, it makes me think about, the story that I just told in the panel about the defibrillators in London,
That's right.
right? A gentleman came up to me at a conference recently from London Ambulance Service, and he said, "We have a big problem in London. If someone has a cardiac arrest and they're in a high rise 10 stories or above, the chance of survival is basically zero." And I said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "Because almost always there's a single defibrillator and it's somewhere on the ground floor. So you've got to go down, find it, and then come back up. And of course, each minute that goes by, there goes, 10% chance of survival." So, could we be making our indoor spaces safer, just as we are our outdoor spaces, by analyzing incident data, analyzing our built world and trying to influence it and change it so that it is safer, whether or not that's for people experiencing emergencies or that's our first responders.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love the idea of not, reverse engineering, and, but, also, I don't know what I even call it, but I think it was when I was out at the Esri conference, I talked about, hey, what if we took all this dispatch information for the last 50 years from fires and EMS calls and everything else, or maybe even law enforcement, and put it into a big AI platform so it could like learn from it going backwards,
Yeah.
and then take it all and then apply all the best practices that we've learned over the last 5 decades and move this forward. and then let it be able to digest all the information from the past, maybe from past mistakes or past things we've learned by, what we've learned, since then, as far as new technologies and everything else. But you never know. I mean, it might be, I think the sky's the limit on some of this stuff. And in a way, it's kind of scary, but
Right. And you would think like no, local knowledge would help just naturally dictate the kinds of things we could do to improve spaces, right? If everybody knows that there's a certain stretch of I-10 in Austin that when it rains and the sun is low in the west, there's accidents, you'd think they would fix it, right?
Right.
But maybe sometimes people lose sight of those things, or they're just not connecting the dots. I heard a story about there was a school student who was shot and paralyzed in a swatting incident, and that was the third time he had been swatted. You'd start to think like, well, why didn't they know about the prior two times? Again, it's that situational intelligence, right? It's not just like having that somewhere within a CAD screen, but it's saying, we think this could be, and then to your point, taking it a much step further and saying, let's try to make our world a safer place.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because information that can't be brought to bear and used right now is, earlier I was thinking, we were talking about, this, and I was thinking the movie Top Gun. Remember, he said, how far out are the other jets? Because they were in a dogfight.
Yeah.
And he said, hey, they're 7 minutes out. He goes, this will be over in 2, so, and so that's where then they scrambled Maverick and, you saved the day. But but it made sense because, somebody once posed a question that said, just to make a point, would you rather have the foremost cardiac physician in the United States respond to your heart attack when you fall over on the floor in 45 minutes, or an EMT who it's his first day, who's there in 30 seconds? Well, I can tell you, I'd rather have that EMT because, it's critical that he acts immediately, right? In real time. And so, yeah, but beauty of it is I want the both worlds. So, is your products, things like that. It's almost like I'm getting the foremost cardiac surgeon, in the country there in 30 seconds. So timing is everything. It's like the point you made earlier about timing and where we're at in the world now. It's only going to get better. And that's, somebody was earlier, we were talking about scary, right? Oh man, AI is scary. This is scary. But it's also like just astoundingly positive that, wow, what's next as far as what we can do with these tools.
Absolutely. It makes me think of the Safe Streets for All grants that the DOT has put out, right, to try to reduce highway traffic fatalities and casualties. The idea kind of being, if you can free up resources in your local jurisdiction, maybe that would allow you to provide more expedited response on the freeways. Seems to make sense. So I thought about, what if we could help senators understand, and metropolitan planning organizations, which are the ones that get involved with this, understand, what are the emergency response capabilities of today? It's not fire of the future or the ECC of the future. It's of today if we had the resources to procure those things and deploy them in a way that was interoperable, right?
Oh,
I
yeah.
think it's helping people understand truly where the state of things are today and helping people get there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like the way you put it in, in those terms, because actually, you take something very complex as far as the problem, and in reality, these are simple solutions. But they've been looked at, every way, kind of angle possible to finally refine it into X, right? And and that's where like the use of AI in the future. We talked about we said the speed of need, right? I mean, I think AI is going to solve for X for that equation, for that timing that we talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to that question I asked a little while ago about FirstNet, right? You have this
Right.
resilient public safety grade mission critical network that has been around for a long time and continues to be improved. Now what?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I remember it said when FirstNet was a concept, and public safety was pushing it real hard. They said, "Well, it's a great idea, folks, but some of the technology that's going to have to come about for this to take place is not there yet." And then big smile by Jeff Johnson, but we're confident it's coming, and it did over and over again.
Yeah.
Actually, well beyond what we thought, and that's because of you guys. So appreciate that. But so like The future, and we talk about what's next. So, GeoAI, digital twins, and operational intelligence, right? So technology continues to evolve rapidly. Artificial intelligence, digital twins, augmented reality, and predictive analytics, are moving from concepts into operational tools. So where do you see indoor GIS heading over the next 5 years?
So this is a very, very interesting question, a very good question. I've had some friends in the industry who have referred to indoor GIS as being the next frontier of GIS, and as initially corny as that might sound, I think it's true because we have this whole world that we spend 90% of our lives in that really isn't mapped, or at least for the purposes of public safety, right? And I think we will see a permeation of indoor maps, and we will see on a much greater scale the aggregation of those maps and standardization of them so that the data in the maps are shareable and accessible across jurisdictional lines in a very brief period of time so that they can improve emergency response, effectively working towards creating a digital twin of the world, whether or not that's outdoors or indoors, right? Where it can be that fusion platform for taking static data, real-time data, things that are geospatial or can be associated geospatially, dumping it all in a single place where we as public safety practitioners can all have access to and support. I suspect at the speed of technology now, we're going to get there much more quickly than we think, so long as we tackle the people problems.
Right.
The G word, governance, right? And the C word, cooperation, right? Making sure that those sometimes dirty words actually aren't dirty, but that we tackle them and we successfully tackle them.
Well, I'm going to give Greg Brown a little, shout out for, when you talk about, the four C's that he always touts, cooperation, collaboration, communication, and coordination. And he said, man, I apply that to everything I look at, everything I do, and everything I talk about, and he's retired now from Eureka Fire Department in St. Louis County, but he was an extreme leader as far as advancing technology in St. Louis County. And so still today, I mean, he's well sought after for his advice, and he loves Esri. I know
It's
that.
a very, very wise set of forewords on his part. That's incredible.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so, how does, like, we talk about FirstNet is, that backbone, that, it's kind of the underlay, and then Esri overlay and some of these other technologies, but kind of ride on those tracks. And so how does FirstNet provide the communications foundation needed to connect all these technologies into a single operational environment?
In my mind, and it's a great question. In my mind, it comes down to the resiliency, the fact it is public safety grade, and that it has the preemptive capabilities that allow people at scale to leverage the network successfully and, again, reliably, right? For me, that's like the bottom of the pyramid, right?
Right.
You can then layer your data on, you can layer your apps on, you can layer your services, you can layer AI on to derive your insights. But without that network, nothing happens, right? Without that network, you don't have coordination, right? You can't talk from person to person, computer to computer with nearly enough speed and bandwidth to be able to make those snap decisions.
Yeah, we've come a long way for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so, digital twins, that's such a cool concept, as far as, from my perspective, being in fire. Can you kind of explain that a little bit more? And
Yeah, the way that I think about digital twins is that it's a digital representation of the world around us that's almost living. So that might be the building exteriors we see, it might be the street I'm looking at right now, but it may include the cars that are driving in some anonymized fashion so we know where the traffic is. It might be temperature sensors outdoors, it might be stream gauge sensors, it might be um, things we have not yet ever thought of that are only being dreamed up by kids who are 5 years old that will somehow provide data that plugs into all of this. So you can view it as kind of this like living, breathing, vibrating system where it is truly alive and it provides you a way to analyze the world around us computationally. And it provides a platform where you can share that information with other systems, other people, etc. So In simplest of terms, I think of digital twins as simply being a digital representation of everything that's around us. And as we start building that out, we collect the outdoor data, we throw the indoor data in there, and that gives us that platform to fuse all of this information together.
Right. So I think like you remember Surfside collapse in
Mhm.
Florida,
Yeah.
and so I was talking to Dave Downey, retired Chief Miami-Dade, and he was even though he was retired, he was brought to that scene because of his expertise. But I believe what I'd heard was that they used like um, there was an exact same building was built just not too far down the road from that one, and it had collapsed. And somebody said, we need more information on this building and
Mhm.
how it's laid out and everything before it collapsed. And so they utilized the information. I think they physically went down and looked at it. Also got some maps and things that were in the building that were accessible because of course it was still intact.
Mhm.
But it's almost like it was a digital twin, right? I mean,
Yeah,
but not
100%.
digital.
Right, right, and it makes me think of a term that, a good friend of mine, Jeremy Pilgrim from the UK, has said his company has mapped over 4,000 schools in the UK, but for space management purposes, then it's like, could we use those for public safety? That would be amazing. He refers to those maps as a digital estate. It's a first-class citizen, right?
Yep.
That's maybe even more important than having the blueprints.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, that becomes a living, breathing asset for that building owner, the facilities manager, the occupants in it, right?
Right. I like that. It's just to look at it as a living and breathing kind of thing because, if it's stale stagnant, that's where we run into trouble.
Yeah.
So that's what's got to be breathing,
Mhm.
so it's
Yeah.
ever evolving, changing, ready to be updated. So, fantastic. So, looking ahead, to the 2026 PSBTA FirstNet Vision Summit that's September 14th through 16th at the South Point in Las Vegas, which is a pretty cool place. So we're excited that Esri will be joining us at the the 2026 FirstNet Vision Summit. But without giving away too much, what are you most looking forward to discussing with public safety leaders from across the country?
I think the thing I'm most looking forward to is learning from what they're doing today, because even just an hour and a half ago during the panel I was a part of, I met someone who was doing some incredible work that I never knew even existed, and I knew nothing about that work, right? I'm certain there are other folks out there today that are doing indoor GIS and indoor maps or have thought about it, and they may be thinking about things even that, none of us have thought about. So learning from people and learning what they're doing, much less learning what their challenges are, I think is the thing I'm looking forward to the most.
When I was out at your conference, down in Redlands, and it's like collaboration in action. I watch you guys and just
Mhm,
how you operate, and it's like a philosophy, right? And then you can
mhm,
see light bulbs going on. So look out, get out of the
yeah,
way. But you're taking and making those connections, and the way that was set up was to get that collaborative environment in each one of those sessions
mhm,
because it was like not like this one's like speed dating
mhm.
for the conference, but they were like I think 40-minute sessions, something like that. It was just it's interesting to see that, but then and you guys were like just very alert to listening to the questions and the comments from those that are attending,
Mhm.
and you see a lot of collaboration there. I love that model. I just wanted to comment
Well,
on.
thank you, and it's something that, even prior to coming to Esri and as a attendee, like, I love that conference because I could sit down and talk to someone about using GIS for, wastewater management, which is
Wow.
not something I ever get involved in, but in hearing how they've solved problems and how they've been successful at that can really inspire you to think a little bit differently, and that's one of the things I find the most fascinating about GIS is, hearing about a corporation applying it, for their own safety purposes, or, hearing about a utility company optimize their operations and go, you know what, actually that might apply to fire, in a way that I never thought of, right?
Oh
It,
yeah.
it, it if you could see all the light bulbs that went off, that'd be like looking at the sun, man. It is just unbelievable there.
Well, it's neat to see folks get
Yeah.
excited about what they're doing. And so like the at the FirstNet Vision Summit the PSBTA is putting on, I mean, we pride ourselves in bringing public safety together, and that's why we love having you guys there. And your philosophy fits so much into ours because it's across all
Mhm.
disciplines, and we're bringing everybody together. And You know, we don't want to talk at them. We want, we want to have that exchange. We want to have the 4 C's,
Mhm.
like, Chief Brown said. Um, and so, having you guys there to help facilitate that as well, because, it's kind of the blood that runs through the veins of Esri
Mhm.
for sure. So I appreciate that. And I'm excited about, we're going to have a good time out there.
Oh,
So,
that's going to be wonderful. Yeah, I've loved every year that I've gone, and this year is going to be really, really excellent. I can't wait. I mean, uh, just the amount of learning and collaboration that you have the opportunity to do is unbelievable.
it's neat because, I had a fire chief tell me, he goes, I hate to say this, but I picked the brain more. I spent more time picking the brain of law enforcement at our conference,
Mhm.
In Vegas, last time I was there, and then in Indy. He said then he spent his last 15 years, in working in fire administration.
Mhm.
And he said, it's not because, we're uncomfortable with each other. It's just, you get that narrow kind of, I guess you're kind of in your mission, vision, and values are slightly different, but then they all come together. And he said it was refreshing to kind of, the vulnerability, expose it and go, hey, I don't know about, can you tell me more about, this part of what you guys do and whatever. And next thing you know, man, they're exchanging notes and they're communicating after the conference and across the country.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, locally, they're getting together, whereas they hadn't before. And that's in emergency management too. I had so many emergency managers tell me how much they appreciated, being at the conference because what they said. He said, sometimes, because I put myself in my own silo, I don't even know it, and
Mhm.
he said it just makes you comfortable talking across disciplines, and then it becomes a habit, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
but
Good.
you almost have to make yourself kind of be uncomfortable sometimes, and then, of course, then you're comfortable. So it's kind
Exactly. Then they do it all over again.
oh yeah.
Right. Right.
But so today's conversation, it reminds us that technology alone doesn't make public safety stronger. So success comes from combining trusted partnerships, accurate information, resilient communications, and commitment to collaboration. And so indoor GIS is helping us better understand the environments where emergencies occur. FirstNet ensures that critical information can be delivered securely and reliably to responders in the moments that matter most. So together, these capabilities are creating a more connected and more informed public safety ecosystem. And I love that word ecosystem. I
Mhm.
use it all the time for good reason,
Mhm.
because that's what it takes. It takes us intersecting technologies coming together with the backbone with that reliable communications and bringing it to bear for situational intelligence in real time. So,
Mhm.
Brooks, thank you for joining us and for sharing your insights. And thank you, everyone out there for listening. But anything you want to finish up with, before I just do a little closing statement about the conference.
I think I would just close out by coming back to that two-word question again. Now what? Right? When we do have that secure, resilient network that's like the air we breathe, right? As you work your way up that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, now what? And I think that's what excites me the most and why I'm so excited for the conference coming up in September. So, Chief, thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, and I love your phrase, the science of where.
Mhm.
So maybe there's a kind of another dimension to it, the science of what that goes
Yeah.
right
Right.
along with it.
Yeah.
So like you talked about, fusing
Mhm.
those things together.
Yeah.
So appreciate it. So we hope you'll join us this September at the 2026 PSBTA FirstNet Vision Summit. Of course, where leaders from across public safety, government, technology, healthcare, emergency communications, and critical infrastructure will come together to explore the innovations shaping the future of mission critical communications. So until next time, I'm John Paul Jones, and remember, the future is now. Thank you.